Dusk came early along the Elk River, pressing low clouds and a bone-deep chill over the sleepy edge of town. The wind whipped across the empty highway, pushing stray leaves and a sense of unfinished things through the evening air. Wyatt Granger drove his battered Forest Service pickup slow, headlights tunneling through the mist that rose from the river. His day had stretched long, smoke checks, downed fence calls, the kind of quiet trouble that keeps a ranger's hands busy, but his mind elsewhere. He was ready to head home, to the silence of his small house, but the river pulled at him as it always did, a place both wound and salve. Out past the last road sign, movement caught his eye, a shape too rough for a deer, too upright for a bear. Wyatt eased to a stop and stepped out, boots crunching frost-bitten grass. The air smelled of mud and far-off snow. By the riverbank, a horse grazed in the failing light, alone, muddy, his sides heaving with the last shakes of fear. The animal's coat was a deep brown, nearly black with river mud, a narrow white blaze down his nose. His legs bore fresh scrapes, and one ear was notched, a sign of some old trouble. Wyatt spoke low, letting his words fall like leaves. "Hey there, buddy," he murmured, reaching into his jacket pocket. "It's just me. You hungry?" The horse, Banner, though Wyatt didn't know his name yet, froze, every muscle strung tight. His eyes were wide and sharp, nostrils flaring as he weighed Wyatt's approach. The two stood in a silent standoff, the only sound the rush of water and the distant thrum of a storm coming on. Wyatt kept his hand open, palm up, offering an apple. Banner sniffed the air, legs trembling, but hunger and something softer won out. He inched forward, stretching his neck to snatch the apple from Wyatt's hand, just long enough for Wyatt to slip a rope lightly over his neck. "Good boy," Wyatt whispered, feeling Banner's fear in the tight set of his shoulders. Thunder rumbled over the hills, electric and mean. Out of the corner of his eye, Wyatt caught the flicker of headlights, a battered pickup idling far down the empty road, its engine coughing in the cold. For a moment it lingered, then slipped away as Wyatt led the horse from the river's edge. Wyatt's gut tightened. Strays in Elk River were rare. Horses didn't just appear out of nowhere. Someone had left this animal. Someone was watching. As Wyatt walked Banner toward his trailer, his fingers found a battered leather halter beneath the mud and burrs. The brass tag read, #19, return if found. No other information. Tied into the halter was a strip of bloody bandage, crusted and stiff. Wyatt knelt to check it, careful not to spook Banner. There, under the bandage, a small, folded scrap of paper was tucked against the leather. He turned so the wind wouldn't snatch it from his hand and read the hurried, uneven scrawl. "If you're reading this, he's not safe yet." Wyatt looked up at the empty highway, the hush of the river, the gathering dark. Something inside him, the old part, the rodeo part, the part that never quit, came to life. He ran his palm over Banner's trembling neck, memorizing every scrape and scar. "Don't worry, boy," he said, voice rough as gravel but soft as a promise. "You found me. We'll figure this out together." He loaded Banner into the trailer, every sense alert, eyes scanning for returning headlights, for anyone watching too close. His home, with its small barn and one sagging porch light, was only a few miles down the road. He kept his window cracked the whole way, listening for engines behind him. But the night had closed in now, the storm threatening, and all Wyatt could hear was the thump of his own heart and Banner's uneasy shifting in the trailer. When they arrived, Wyatt led Banner into the barn, lantern lights swinging in arcs of gold and shadow. The horse hesitated on the threshold, muscles quivering, then stepped inside, each hoof fall uncertain, as if he expected the ground to give way. Wyatt spoke to him, low and steady, as he brushed out the worst of the mud and checked for deeper wounds. Outside, thunder split the sky. Inside, Wyatt's world narrowed to the warmth of the barn, the soft breathing of the horse, the hiss of rain on tin. For a moment, Wyatt's own grief, a wound 2 years old, still unhealed, stirred under his ribs. He pushed it down, focusing on Banner, this stranger with secrets, and a warning bandaged to his halter. The first night, as the storm raged, Wyatt sat with Banner, scratching notes about the horse in his battered notebook. He didn't know who Banner was running from or why, but he recognized the look in the horse's eyes, a hunger for trust, a wariness born of pain, the same look Wyatt sometimes saw in his own mirror. When he turned out the light, Banner stood in the farthest corner, sides rising and falling, gaze fixed on the door. Wyatt paused before leaving, laying the bloodied bandage on the workbench, that scrap of paper heavy in his palm. If you're reading this, he's not safe yet. Wyatt understood. Some things follow you, no matter how far you run. But for tonight, horse and man had found each other. Two survivors, lost and not yet safe, sharing a sliver of light in a world full of shadows. Rain hammered the tin roof well past midnight, rattling the windows and beating a steady, anxious rhythm in Wyatt's bones. The barn was small but sturdy, the walls lined with old rodeo posters and weathered tack, each piece a memory Wyatt rarely let himself revisit. Tonight, the space felt different, tighter, charged with the storm and with Banner's restless energy. The horse paced the straw, hooves scuffing deep into the floor, nostrils wide, breath coming sharp and quick every time lightning slashed the night. Wyatt sat on an overturned bucket, elbows on knees, eyes never leaving Banner. He hummed quietly, one of the old rodeo songs, half forgotten, worn into him by years on the road. The tune floated through the barn, blending with the rain, a fragile thread of calm in the turmoil. Banner circled, then hesitated, torn between flight and the strange comfort of Wyatt's voice. For a long moment, man and horse eyed each other in the flickering lantern light, both uncertain, both battered by storms of their own making. Thunder boomed, closer now. Banner shied hard, banging his hip against the stall door. Wyatt moved slow, hands open, his voice steady. "Easy, fella. It's just noise. Won't get through these walls." He crouched near Banner's flank, watching as the horse's sides shuddered with memory. Old scars layered beneath the fresh, a story written in wounds. It was only now, with the rain washing the last mud away, that Wyatt saw the worst of it. Deep scrapes scored both of Banner's front legs, raw and ugly, edges crusted with dirt. Old wounds, two calloused white marks, and beneath the horse's mane, a jagged brand, faded but unmistakable. Wyatt's heart clenched. He knew that brand from somewhere, but the meaning hovered just out of reach. "You've seen some hard miles," Wyatt whispered, "but you made it this far." He worked by lantern light, hands gentle and methodical. Banner flinched as Wyatt dabbed iodine on the scrapes, but didn't pull away. The horse's eyes, dark, uncertain, never left Wyatt's face. As Wyatt wrapped the wounds, humming low, Banner's shivers eased, just a little. Trust, fragile as moth wings, flickered between them. The storm dragged on. Banner stood at the back of his stall, muscles trembling with each crash of thunder, but he didn't bolt again. Wyatt took comfort in that. One small victory against whatever Banner had run from. Suddenly, White headlights swept across the barn windows, bright as day for a split second. Wyatt's breath caught. He set down the bandages, heart thudding. The lights lingered, then slowly crept on, illuminating the muddy lane before stopping by the edge of Wyatt's yard. Silence, heavy and wrong, pressed in. Wyatt wiped his hands on his jeans, reaching for the old rifle hanging near the door, just in case. A knock. Quick, sharp. Wyatt froze, listening. Another knock. Then the unmistakable sound of feet running away through mud and puddles. Banner stamped and snorted, sensing the tension, his whole body coiled and alert. Wyatt peered out into the rain. No one there. Only tire tracks and a set of muddy boot prints trailed from the barn to the road, vanishing in the dark. Back inside, Wyatt found something wedged under the door, a folded, rain-soaked flyer. He peeled it open, the ink bleeding but still legible. Reward, missing horse, dangerous, call immediately. A blurry photo showed Banner, mud-free, alert, that same notched ear unmistakable. Wyatt's jaw tightened. Someone wanted Banner back, and wanted it quiet. He stuffed the flyer into his coat, every nerve alive. Who had come here tonight? And why? Was it the same battered pickup he'd seen by the river? Was it the people who'd marked Banner as dangerous? And what did that mean, really, to label a horse that way? Wyatt heard a scuffling sound from Banner's stall, sharp and urgent. Banner pawed at the straw, eyes fixed on something buried in the muck. Wyatt fetched his lantern and crouched low. There, under the churned straw, Banner unearthed a small brass key, cool and heavy, stamped with a single number. Wyatt turned the key over in his palm, frowning. The same number as Banner's halter tag. Another mystery, another warning. Was it for a locker, a gate? Some place or thing Banner had run from, or toward? The coincidences stacked up, pressing Wyatt's mind into overdrive. Lightning flashed again. Wyatt moved through the barn, checking every window, every latch. The flyer's photo burned in his mind. Banner watched him, tail swishing, flanks tense. Wyatt ran his hand down the horse's mane, feeling the raised scar of the brand. Government, he was almost certain now, though he couldn't yet remember why it mattered. He tossed another blanket over Banner's back and sat again in the straw. The air smelled of iodine and old sweat, leather and rain. The barn felt both sanctuary and trap, safe from the storm, but not from the shadows moving in its wake. The rest of the night came in fragments. Banner drifting closer, his nose brushing Wyatt's sleeve, the far-off echo of tires on wet gravel, the endless hush of rain. Wyatt drifted in and out of sleep, every muscle tense, the brass key pressed tight in his fist. Dreams came, memories of another storm, another loss, the ache of absence never far from his heart. As dawn crept in, weak and gray, Wyatt knew nothing was simple anymore. Banner wasn't just a stray. He was a piece of a story too big to ignore, a living question with danger chasing close behind. Wyatt stood, joints stiff, and whispered to Banner, "Whatever they're after, they'll have to go through me first." The horse flicked his ears, eyes finally softening. Outside, the storm had passed, but the ground was heavy with secrets. And inside, two survivors, one man, one horse, prepared for whatever would come next. The storm had blown itself out by dawn, leaving behind a hush broken only by the drip of water off the eaves and the low, aching whistle of wind threading through the cottonwoods. The barn, half lit by a weak Montana sun, was filled with the dusty smell of old hay and the faint tang of medicine. Wyatt Granger lingered over the morning chores, moving slower than usual, his muscles stiff from a night spent half sleeping in the straw with Banner nearby. He brewed coffee on a camp stove in the barn aisle, steam curling in the cold air, and poured 2 mugs out of habit. One for himself, one left on the bench for a guest who would never return. The gesture was old, automatic, a ritual he hadn't let go since his wife's death 2 years before. Some mornings, Wyatt still expected her to appear, brushing hay from her jeans, humming some tune as she fed the horses. The ache was familiar, worn smooth by time, but never far from the surface. Banner watched Wyatt from his stall, ears pricked, eyes following every movement. Last night's panic had faded, replaced by a deep fatigue. The horse stood quietly, shifting his weight. As Wyatt approached with a curry comb and a pocketful of carrots. For a few moments, Wyatt worked in silence, letting the rhythm of grooming calm them both. The comb pulled loose clumps of mud and hair, revealing the horse's rich brown coat beneath, still marked by scrapes and the faint outline of that government brand. "You're a mystery, aren't you?" Wyatt said softly, brushing along Banner's shoulder. "Wish you could talk." Banner sniffed his hand, then nudged the carrots from Wyatt's palm. Gentler now, less frantic than before. It was a small thing, but it felt like a gift. Wyatt smiled despite himself, careful not to show too much, as if joy were a fragile thing that might spook the horse. He lingered over the work, noticing how Banner flinched at sudden sounds, but no longer shied away from Wyatt's touch. Hours passed in quiet routine, feeding, mucking out stalls, checking the fencing outside. By midday, the clouds had lifted, revealing distant blue sky and a dusting of snow on the mountains. Wyatt led Banner into the paddock for some sun, letting him stretch and roll in the frost-bitten grass. The horse limped a little, but his steps grew steadier as he moved, the fresh air loosening the tension in his body. Wyatt stayed close, talking softly, telling Banner stories no one else heard anymore. He spoke of his late wife, of the trail horse they'd lost in the same storm that took her, of the years he'd spent riding rodeo, of the scars he carried, some visible, some not. The words came haltingly at first, but soon poured out, as if Banner's silence invited all the grief and hope Wyatt kept hidden. The act of speaking soothed him, like confession in an empty church. When the chill deepened toward evening, Wyatt led Banner back inside and pulled a battered box from the loft above the tack room. Inside were old letters, yellowed envelopes addressed in his wife's looping script, clippings from rodeo magazines, a few faded photographs. He sat on a hay bale and read aloud from one letter, voice barely above a whisper. "You'd have liked her," Wyatt murmured, glancing at Banner. "She had a way with the tough ones." Banner, usually wary of close company, edged nearer. He nosed Wyatt's boot, then rested his head close, just a breath away, but close enough to feel the warmth. Wyatt stilled, heart pounding. It was the first time since the storm that Banner had chosen him, if only for a moment. For Wyatt, that brief contact was like a spark in the dark, a reminder that connection was possible, that trust could be rebuilt, piece by piece, day by day. He let the moment linger, afraid to move, not wanting to break the fragile thread between them. Outside, the world moved on. Wyatt heard the distant growl of a log truck on the highway, the call of a hawk circling above the river. But in the barn, time seemed to slow. He packed away the letters, brushing dust from his hands, and watched Banner settle in the straw, finally calm. Before turning in, Wyatt took another look at the brand under Banner's mane. The jagged mark, faded but clear, matched one he'd seen on government Mustangs released into the wild near Elk River. There'd been talk in town, quiet, uneasy talk, about the horses from that program. Rumors of mistreatment, of horses lost after being labeled unmanageable or dangerous, of volunteers who asked too many questions. Wyatt's memory sharpened, a thread of anger winding through his thoughts. He wondered if Banner was one of those Mustangs, caught between freedom and captivity, marked by more than just iron and fire. And he wondered what it would mean for both of them if the rumors were true. That night, as he locked the barn and paused under the stars, Wyatt felt a twinge of hope, raw and unfamiliar, but real. Maybe, he thought, the broken could find each other. Maybe they could even heal together, if they kept moving forward, slow and steady as the Elk River itself. He glanced back at the barn, saw Banner watching him through the half-open door. In that look, Wyatt saw not just fear, but something softer, possibility, the first hint of belonging. And for the first time in years, he let himself believe that even old wounds might one day mend. Montana mornings come with their own kind of hush. Cold blue light spilling over Elk River, long shadows stretching across the fields. Wyatt Granger started his day as he always did, feeding Banner, checking the barn locks, listening for anything out of place. But today, every little thing felt heavy with questions. The key Banner had uncovered the night before, stamped with Chio 19, just like the horse's halter tag, rested in Wyatt's pocket, an itch he couldn't scratch. Wyatt's mind turned over the details as he made his way to town, Banner's flyer folded inside his jacket. He drove past the old rodeo arena, past boarded-up buildings and faded signs, toward the feed store on Main. If anyone in Elk River would know something about a strange horse or a hidden key, it would be someone here. The bell above the door jingled as Wyatt stepped inside, the store filled with the smell of oats, leather, and machine oil. He exchanged quiet nods with old-timers playing cards in the corner, then wandered the aisles, pretending to browse. His eyes kept drifting toward the windows, checking for unfamiliar trucks or faces. He grabbed a sack of grain and headed to the register. As he paid, Wyatt kept his tone casual. "You ever hear about government horses gone missing? Out by the river, maybe?" The clerk, a thin woman with a braid down her back, glanced up, frowning. "Not supposed to talk about that. But some folks say those horses get lost on purpose. Last one that poked around, asking questions, found himself out of a job." Wyatt nodded, tucking the information away. Outside, as he loaded the grain, he noticed a stranger in a dusty coat lingering by his truck, eyeing Banner through the paddock fence across the street. The man's hat brim was pulled low, face shadowed, but his stance radiated tension. Banner, out in the paddock, reacted before Wyatt could even speak. The horse stiffened, nostrils flaring, ears pinned flat. He stomped and sweated, muscles bunching under his hide, as if old terror was being dredged up by the stranger's scent alone. Wyatt moved fast, putting himself between Banner and the fence. The man didn't speak. He turned on his heel and slipped away, disappearing into the alley behind the feed store. Wyatt's heart pounded. This was no coincidence. Someone was watching, waiting. Maybe the same person who'd left muddy prints at the barn, or the driver of the battered pickup by the river. He'd seen enough in his life to know a predator when he spotted one, even if he couldn't yet name the prey. Back at the barn, Banner was still on edge, pacing and blowing hard. Wyatt stroked his neck, murmuring, "It's all right, boy. He's gone now." The horse relaxed, just a fraction, but Wyatt could feel the tension thrumming beneath his skin, a warning that the past was not done with them. That afternoon, Wyatt visited Dr. Salazar, the local vet. The clinic was small and cluttered, the shelves lined with old textbooks and faded photos of horses Wyatt had known for years. He trusted Salazar, a quiet, serious woman with eyes that missed nothing. Wyatt explained about Banner, the brand, the flyer, the key. He left out nothing. Salazar listened, then sighed. "I've had 3 horses brought in this month, all marked dangerous. None of them were mean, just scared. Every single one vanished from their holding pens. And now, you bring me Banner." She shook her head. "Something's wrong with that whole government program. They're supposed to be managing wild horses, but all I see is good animals disappearing and rumors swirling." Wyatt nodded, jaw clenched. "You ever see this key before?" He handed her the brass 19. Salazar examined it, her brow furrowed. "Could be from one of the old lockers out at the government holding facility, north side of the canyon. They used numbered tags on the gates. Some pens got shut for good after the complaints." Wyatt's mind raced. It made sense. Banner, branded and scarred, a key that matched his tag. A flyer calling him dangerous, and now strangers lurking, watching every move. Back at home, unable to sit still, Wyatt climbed into the barn's rafters to search for answers. Years of junk littered the beams, coils of wire, broken tools, boxes of things best forgotten. Near the far end, tucked behind a stack of feed sacks, he found an envelope yellowed with age. Inside, a brittle news clipping. The headline was blunt: "Government horses disappear. Volunteer dies under suspicious circumstances." Wyatt's breath caught. The article detailed how several wild horses from the controversial Mustang release program had gone missing. No paperwork, no explanation. The whistleblower, a local volunteer, had been found dead near the river, cause officially listed as an accident, but with rumors of foul play. Wyatt reread the article, dread curling in his stomach. Banner wasn't just a stray. He was living proof of something much bigger and much darker. Maybe the same darkness that had circled Wyatt's life for years, taking what he loved and leaving him to pick up the pieces. Wyatt returned to Banner, who stood waiting in the fading light, the river's song drifting through the open door. He ran his hand along Banner's mane, feeling the scar beneath. "We're not running anymore," Wyatt said, voice low. "We're going to find out the truth, whatever it takes." That night, as the sky filled with stars and coyotes called in the distance, Wyatt lay awake, the clipping beside him, Banner's breathing a steady anchor in the dark. Secrets swirled around them. Keys, brands, warnings, and the cold certainty that someone would do anything to keep the past buried. But Wyatt had lost too much to turn away now. For the first time in a long while, he felt something more than grief, a slow, rising anger, and the faint but steady beat of hope. Together, he and Banner would pull back the curtain and finally bring the truth to light. The days turned slow and golden as late autumn crept over Elk River, the cottonwoods by the bank flaring yellow, then dropping their leaves all at once. Wyatt Granger leaned into his routines, moving through each task with careful purpose, spreading feed, mending fences, keeping Banner close by his side. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Each sunrise brought new questions, and each night pressed him to keep moving, even as old grief threatened to freeze him in place. On a Sunday morning, clouds hung low and heavy over the distant mountains. Wyatt packed up his sketchbook and a bag of apples, clipped a lead rope to Banner's halter, and led him out beyond the pasture. They walked through waist-high grass, dew soaking Wyatt's boots, until they reached a secluded meadow surrounded by willows and the wide, slow sweep of the river. Here, the world felt safe, out of sight from the road, tucked between the arms of the land itself. He let Banner loose in the tall grass, settling into a patch of wildflowers with his sketchbook open across his knees. Banner grazed nearby, muscles relaxed, tail flicking at flies. Wyatt watched him for a long while, letting the silence fill the space between them. The quiet wasn't empty. It was alive with the sound of the river, the steady rhythm of hooves in soft earth, and the distant cry of a hawk circling above. Wyatt started to draw. He captured the slope of Banner's shoulders, the jagged line of his notched ear, the wary tilt of his head. Every stroke was slow and deliberate, an act of seeing, of honoring the living proof of survival standing before him. Banner grazed closer, nostrils quivering, ears flicking at the sound of pencil on paper. As the morning wore on, a small herd of wild deer drifted through the trees, heads high, eyes alert but unafraid. Banner lifted his head, watching them pass, then moved to stand between Wyatt and the herd, a silent sentinel, muscles tense, ready to protect. Wyatt felt something shift inside him, the familiar ache of loss mingling with a glimmer of hope. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the sunlight on his face, letting the grief and hope exist together. By midday, Wyatt stretched out in the grass, hands behind his head, watching clouds drift across the pale sky. Banner stood nearby, grazing and occasionally glancing at Wyatt, as if checking to be sure he was still there. The meadow felt timeless, a pocket of safety untouched by the dark questions gathering on the horizon. That evening, back at the barn, Banner balked at the doorway. Wyatt coaxed him gently, but the horse refused, pawing at the ground, tail flicking anxiously. Finally, Banner settled himself outside Wyatt's window, standing guard in the deepening dusk. Wyatt watched from inside, comforted by the horse's presence, a living reminder that trust was being built, one patient moment at a time. The next day, Wyatt found himself rummaging through old boxes in his wife's closet, driven by a restlessness he couldn't shake. He unearthed her leather-bound journal, worn and battered, pages crowded with looping handwriting. Sitting on the porch, Wyatt flipped through the entries, his breath catching as familiar names and places surfaced. Old ranches, rescue horses, notes about the government holding facility north of the canyon. Then he saw it, scrawled in the margin of a page about abused animals. Banner? The name was underlined, the ink smeared as if written in a hurry. Wyatt's heart hammered. There were other notes too, cryptic warnings, phone numbers, descriptions of mistreatment. She'd been worried, haunted by what she'd seen at the facility, but had told him little. Now, reading her words, the pieces started to fit together. Wyatt brought the journal to Dr. Salazar, the vet, that afternoon. They sat in the cramped office, the journal open between them. Salazar read in silence, her brow furrowed. She was onto something, the vet finally said, voice hushed. This isn't just about one horse. There's a pattern. Animals labeled dangerous or unmanageable go missing. Some end up dead. Others, like Banner, just vanish. Wyatt stared at the wall, anger and guilt swirling in his gut. He should have listened more closely. He should have asked. But regret was useless now. What mattered was what he would do next. He left the vet's office and drove Banner out to the meadow again, this time just as the sun was dipping low, painting the river gold. They sat together in silence, Banner standing watch as dusk settled in. For the first time in years, Wyatt felt something more than grief, a steady, quiet fire building inside him. Not rage, but resolve. That night, as the temperature dropped and the stars brightened above the barn, Banner again refused the comfort of a stall. Instead, he positioned himself outside Wyatt's bedroom window, unmoving, a silent guardian against whatever darkness might come. Wyatt watched him from the other side of the glass, and for the first time he slept through the night without waking from old nightmares. Before dawn, Wyatt rose and padded out to Banner, wrapping his arms around the horse's neck, forehead pressed to the soft brown coat. "We're in this together, you and me," he whispered, breath misting in the cold air. Banner stood steady, eyes half closed, trust flickering in their shared quiet. For Wyatt, it was a beginning, not a promise of safety, but the birth of something even rarer, a hope that could stand against the storm. The world had begun to feel steady again. Days in the meadow, nights spent listening to Banner's gentle breaths outside the window. Wyatt Granger felt, for the first time in years, that the ground beneath him wasn't shifting. But peace in Elk River was always temporary, and trouble came back with the first freeze. It started just before dawn, when the dark was thick and full of secrets. Wyatt had been up late reading through his wife's old journal, piecing together every cryptic note, every warning she'd left behind. His eyes burned, his mind running in circles, until the distant bark of a dog and the metallic clatter of something heavy outside jerked him fully awake. Banner, always alert, had been restless all night. Now he neighed, sharp and frightened, hooves thudding the frozen earth. Wyatt threw on his coat and grabbed his rifle, heart pounding in his chest. Outside, the world was shadow and frost. Flashlights bobbed in the blackness by the barn. Two men, their faces hidden beneath hoods, moving fast, quiet as wolves. Wyatt saw them try the barn door, found it locked, and cursed low. Banner, sensing danger, reared in the paddock, snorting and spinning, refusing to let them close. Wyatt stepped into the yard, rifle leveled. "Get the hell off my land!" he shouted, voice cracking through the cold. The men spun, one dropping a crowbar, the other cursing. They darted for the corral, but Banner exploded past the gate, running right at them. The men hesitated, caught off guard by the gelding's boldness. Banner charged, ears flat, mane wild, driving the intruders back with a fury Wyatt had never seen in him before. For a split second, Wyatt saw the old pain in Banner's eyes. Fear, yes, but also a wild courage, the stubbornness that comes from surviving too much. The men scattered. One headed for the river, the other ducked behind Wyatt's pickup, fumbling for something in his pocket. Banner cornered the first man near the water, hooves slashing dangerously close. Wyatt ran to intercept, boots slipping on icy grass. The man swung a flashlight, trying to scare Banner off, but the horse stood his ground, forcing the attacker to back up, step by nervous step. Suddenly, from the shadows near the road, a desperate whinny rang out, a high, thin sound full of panic. Wyatt turned and saw a small foal, trembling and wild-eyed, cornered by the second man. The sight made Wyatt's blood run cold. The man grabbed at the foal's halter, dragging it toward the truck. Banner spun, nostrils flaring, and charged, putting himself between the foal and the man. He kicked, driving the intruder back, protecting the little horse with the same ferocity he'd shown at the river's edge weeks ago. The foal huddled behind Banner, shaking. Wyatt raised his rifle, firing a warning shot into the air. "Enough!" he roared. The men froze, caught between fear and fury. Then, with a final shove, Banner sent one man sprawling into the snow. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the sheriff. The men scrambled, one dropping a ring of keys and a plastic badge as they ran. Wyatt chased after them but stopped short by the water, watching their shapes melt into the trees. He returned to Banner, breathless. The foal pressed close to Banner's side, trusting him completely. Wyatt gathered both horses and herded them back toward the barn. Banner limped slightly, favoring a back leg, but stood tall, unbroken. Sheriff's deputies arrived moments later, lights flashing blue in the winter gloom. Wyatt explained everything, hands trembling with adrenaline. The deputies searched the yard, picking up the dropped badge, government issue, with a name Wyatt didn't recognize. The keys, too, were stamped 19. The same number as Banner's tag, the same as the mysterious brass key Banner had found in the barn. Wyatt pressed the evidence into the deputies' hands. They weren't just here for Banner, he said. They were after that foal, too. Someone's stealing these horses, and it's bigger than anything you're willing to admit. The deputies exchanged nervous glances. One, a younger man Wyatt had seen around town, shifted uncomfortably. "We'll look into it, sir," he said, but his tone was flat, rehearsed. Wyatt's anger flared. "You better do more than look. These men had government IDs, keys. This is organized, and it's happening right under your noses." As the lawman drifted off, Banner stood outside the barn, head high, the foal pressed tight against his flank. Wyatt knelt, stroking Banner's neck. "You saved that little one," he murmured, voice rough. "You saved us both." Inside, Wyatt tended Banner's fresh wounds, hands gentle and sure. The horse flinched at first, but calmed beneath Wyatt's touch. The foal, a filly no older than 6 months, watched everything with wide, uncertain eyes. Wyatt offered her an apple and spoke softly, letting his voice steady the storm inside them all. When the barn was quiet, Wyatt examined the badge and the keys, dread tightening his chest. He remembered the rumors, the dead volunteer, the warnings in his wife's journal. Now he had proof that Banner's story was tangled up with something rotten at the heart of the wild horse program. Banner and the foal slept side by side, finally safe. Wyatt watched over them, one hand on the old rifle, his wife's journal open on his knee, and made himself a vow. He wouldn't let anyone take them, not without a fight. For the first time, Wyatt didn't just feel like a man haunted by his past. He felt like a guardian standing between innocence and the darkness outside. The air in Elk River had a hard, metallic edge in the days that followed the attempted break-in. Wyatt Granger hardly slept, nerves on a razor's edge. He checked every latch and lock twice, sometimes 3 times, his rifle never far from reach. Banner bore a healing cut above his fetlock, but seemed more restless than ever, patrolling the paddock with the new foal at his side, ears cocked for every distant sound. It wasn't just paranoia. Trouble circled closer now, its shape sharpening in the cold light of day. Wyatt watched unmarked trucks cruise past his lane, saw strangers parked too long at the gas station across from the feed store. He heard from Dr. Salazar that someone had broken into her clinic, stealing files on every horse she'd treated from the Mustang program. The law, for its part, moved with a sluggishness that felt almost intentional. When Wyatt pressed the deputies, their answers were clipped, their eyes sliding away. One, a deputy named Riggins, wouldn't meet his gaze at all. Then, on a wind-scoured afternoon, the threat became real. Wyatt was hauling hay from a friend's place outside town, Banner and the foal trailing quietly at his heels, when he spotted movement near his truck. 2 men, one familiar from the night raid, talking urgently, glancing around as if checking for witnesses. Wyatt's stomach dropped. He kept his distance, circling around the barn to watch. As he peered through a crack in the boards, he caught the glint of a badge. One of the men was showing it to Riggins, the deputy who was supposed to be patrolling the North Highway. Riggins nodded, jaw set, then strode away without so much as a backward glance. Wyatt's blood ran cold. He'd suspected, but now he knew. Someone inside the sheriff's department was helping the horse thieves. Wyatt acted quickly, gathering Banner and the foal and heading for cover. He tossed some supplies into a canvas pack: rifle, rope, a canteen, his wife's battered journal, the brass 19 key. He led the horses out the back way, slipping through the cottonwoods and following the river upstream, away from the main roads. The trees pressed in, branches creaking in the wind. The river's song loud and wild. Wyatt set his sights on the old ranger station deep in the woods, a place abandoned since before the fires, now little more than sagging walls and a roof that still held back the worst of the weather. As twilight thickened, they reached the station. Wyatt checked the windows, finding most still boarded, then led Banner and the foal inside. The place smelled of dust and old wood smoke, but it was defensible, with only one door and a single window facing the river. Wyatt barricaded the entrance with a fallen log and settled the horses in what had once been the radio room. His mind worked quickly. He had to buy time, and he needed proof. Banner, battered but fierce, stood between the foal and the door, muscles tense but unwavering. Wyatt crouched beside him, whispering reassurance, feeling the steady heartbeat in the horse's chest. "We're almost there, old friend," he murmured, voice low. "Just hold out a little longer." It wasn't long before headlights cut through the trees, sweeping the clearing with icy beams. Voices echoed. 3, maybe 4 men, moving fast. Wyatt pressed himself flat against the far wall, rifle ready, pulse thudding in his ears. He thought quickly, looping Banner's old halter, marked with the #19 tag, over a nail by the window. He smeared mud on the sill, making it look like Banner had forced his way out. Then he circled around the back, moving silently through the brush, and watched as the men approached. Riggins was with them, his badge now pinned to his belt in a show of false authority. "Must have gone this way," one of the thieves hissed, pointing toward the river. Wyatt waited until they entered the station, then darted back to the front, slamming the log barricade against the door and wedging it tight. He fired a warning shot through the roof, the sound cracking through the trees. Banner stomped and whinnied, holding his ground in front of the foal. Inside, chaos erupted. Shouts, boots pounding against the floor, fists hammering the door. Wyatt's voice rang out, calm and cutting. "You want to leave, you're going to talk. I know about the missing horses. I know who you are. And I've got proof. The sheriff's on his way, and federal agents too. You won't get another chance to disappear." There was a stunned silence. Wyatt backed away, keeping Banner and the foal between himself and the men inside. He pulled out his phone, sending a message to Dr. Salazar with his location. And a single word: help. While the men inside raged and cursed, Wyatt scanned the ranger station for anything useful. In a forgotten storeroom, he pried open a loose board and found more than he dared hope. A hidden file box, stuffed with paperwork, government forms, and a battered notebook filled with notes about illegal horse sales and threats against anyone who tried to blow the whistle. His hands shook as he skimmed the pages. There it was in black and white. Lists of dangerous horses shipped off the record, payments made in cash, and, chillingly, a line about a local volunteer dealt with after getting too close. Banner's name was on one of the earliest lists. The men inside redoubled their efforts, smashing at the door, shouts bouncing through the rafters. Banner never flinched, standing as the foal's shield. Wyatt, rifle ready, braced himself. Then sirens pierced the forest. faint at first, then swelling as federal agents and the sheriff's backup tore down the service road. Wyatt bellowed, "It's over! You're surrounded! You so much as move, you'll never walk out of here!" There was a final crash, a furious roar from within. The door splintered but held. Outside, flashlights blazed as lawmen surrounded the station. A bullhorn boomed. "Drop your weapons! You're under arrest!" Wyatt sagged against the wall, relief and exhaustion crashing over him. Banner stood still, head high, the foal pressed close, both survivors of too many storms. The standoff had ended, but as Wyatt looked around the wrecked old station, at the stolen records and the evidence in his hands, he knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger reckoning. By the time the sirens faded and the last flashlight beam vanished into the trees, a bone-deep quiet settled over the old ranger station. Federal agents moved through the ruins like a cold wind, collecting evidence, photographing every battered file and broken board. Wyatt stood near Banner and the foal, exhaustion threading through his body, but his eyes sharp. Every detail mattered now. Banner nickered softly, nudging Wyatt's arm, as if to remind him that the fight was over, at least for tonight. The foal, still trembling, pressed against Banner's side, wide eyes reflecting the pulsing red and blue lights outside. The agents were thorough. They took the file box from Wyatt, the battered government badge and ring of keys he'd retrieved during the night's chaos, and every page of the notebook detailing the black market horse ring. They questioned Wyatt until dawn about the attack, the complicit deputy, the pattern of missing horses, and the connection to the dangerous labels. Sheriff McBride, a woman with a lined, uncompromising face, met Wyatt's gaze in the pale morning light. "You did good, Granger," she said quietly. "This goes higher than any of us wanted to believe. We'll see to it justice is done." Wyatt nodded, feeling the truth of it weigh on him. He watched as Riggins, the deputy who'd betrayed his badge, was handcuffed and led to a waiting cruiser. His face twisted in a look somewhere between anger and defeat. The other men, caught in the old ranger station like cornered wolves, hung their heads, refusing to look at Wyatt or the agents. For the first time, Wyatt saw fear on their faces, but no remorse. Banner stood close as the sun finally crested the horizon. He was battered and tired, but unbroken. The foal, new to the world, new to safety, leaned against him, both of them survivors, both of them witnesses. As the agents loaded the last of the evidence, a cluster of townsfolk began to arrive, word of the raid spreading fast through Elk River. Dr. Salazar hurried to Banner's side, her hands gentle as she checked his wounds, then turned to the foal, murmuring soft words of comfort. Wyatt knelt in the grass beside Banner, feeling an old weight begin to lift. He pressed his forehead to the horse's mane, closing his eyes. For the first time since his wife's death, he allowed himself to breathe, really breathe, the kind of breath that fills up the empty spaces grief had hollowed out. The town, once indifferent or wary of the Mustangs, now rallied together. Farmers offered to foster rescued horses. Teenagers from the high school showed up with hay and warm blankets. An elderly couple brought coffee and donuts for the agents and volunteers. Even the mayor arrived, demanding a full accounting of what had happened. And more importantly, what would happen next. A community meeting was called for that very evening at the old firehouse. Wyatt, still exhausted, stood before the crowd and told the story. Every dark corner, every lost horse, every moment when it would have been easier to turn away. As he spoke, he saw heads nodding, anger burning in familiar faces. These were his neighbors, people who'd lost their own to storms and fires and now to something even colder. Neglect and greed. Sheriff McBride took the floor, "Effective immediately," she announced. "Federal oversight will be implemented on all wild horse management in Montana. No more disappearing animals, no more secret programs, and no more looking the other way." Her voice never trembled. Not once. A federal agent added that an official investigation was underway and that community volunteers would be needed for a new oversight board. Wyatt watched as hands shot up, volunteers eager to do what they could to right the wrongs that had been uncovered. By the time night fell again, Banner and the foal were resting in a safe holding pen at Dr. Salazar's clinic. Wyatt visited them there, sitting on a bale of straw with his hand on Banner's neck, the foal curled up nearby. He spoke in a low voice, words for their ears alone. "You kept us moving, Banner. You kept me from giving up." Wyatt stroked the gelding's nose, feeling the roughness of the old scars. "We're not running anymore, you hear me? We're home." The clinic was quiet, full of the smells of hay and iodine and hope. For the first time, Wyatt didn't feel haunted by loss. Instead, he felt a slow warmth spreading through his chest, the certainty that something had shifted, not just in his life, but in Elk River itself. A few days later, news came down from Helena. A new law would be drafted, requiring full transparency in wild horse management, mandatory community involvement, and stiffer penalties for abuse or neglect. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was a start, a signal that Banner's story, and the stories of all the lost horses, would matter. The town threw a small gathering to honor Wyatt, Dr. Salazar, and the volunteers who had risked everything to protect the animals. Wyatt stood quietly at the edge, a hand resting on Banner's withers, the foal at his side. There were no speeches, no fanfare, just the quiet recognition of neighbors who had chosen, finally, to see and to act. As the evening light faded, Wyatt looked out at Elk River, the cottonwoods gilded by sunset, the world calm and new again. He smiled, slow and genuine, feeling Banner's steady presence beside him. The battle was over, for now. The scars would remain, but so would the hope. In the fading dusk, with Banner's head resting against his shoulder and the foal dozing in the straw, Wyatt understood at last. Justice wasn't just punishment. It was belonging, restoration, a kind of healing that spread through a town the way morning sunlight melts the last of the frost. And for the first time, as night settled soft and sure over Elk River, Wyatt Granger was ready to begin again. Weeks slipped by, marked by the steady hush of snow falling outside, the easy rhythm of barn chores, and the slow, unmistakable sense that life in Elk River was settling into something new. The scars of winter still clung to the land, ice lining the riverbank, trees etched black against a white sky. But inside Wyatt Granger's world, a gentler thaw was underway. The foal had begun to trust, trailing after Banner everywhere, nibbling at Wyatt's coat, and sometimes even sleeping curled at his feet. Banner's wounds healed slowly, and the old wariness in his eyes softened to something like calm whenever Wyatt approached. The community, too, seemed changed. Neighbors who'd once kept their distance now waved from across fields or stopped by with apple pie and fresh bread, always asking after the horses. Each morning, Wyatt led Banner and the foal down to the riverbank. The river ran cold and deep, its voice the same as always, ancient, patient, relentless. Wyatt brought a battered notebook with him, a pencil worn almost to the nub, and sometimes just sat on a driftwood log, scribbling his thoughts as the horses grazed. One day, with snow still glinting in the sun, Wyatt wrote, "Banner's survival and mine came down to one stubborn truth. Neither of us gave up. Not when the past tried to swallow us. not when others turned away, not when grief threatened to make us forget who we are. He watched as Banner nosed at the foal, the two horses silhouetted against the broad sweep of water and sky. Wyatt let his mind drift, remembering all the steps that had brought them here. The wild thunderstorm, the note hidden under Banner's halter, the nights filled with danger and the sudden desperate charge to the ranger station. All of it seemed impossibly distant now, like another life. But healing wasn't just about what faded away. It was about what grew in its place. Wyatt found himself talking again, to Banner, to the foal, even to his late wife as he sat by the river. He read her old letters, sometimes aloud, sometimes just in his head, feeling her presence in every sunrise and in every small act of mercy that life offered. One afternoon, Banner wandered over while Wyatt was lost in thought, and nudged him with a gentle persistence. Wyatt grinned, tucking the notebook away. He ran his hand over Banner's scarred neck, and for the first time didn't feel a stab of guilt, just gratitude. The bond they'd forged had become something fierce and steady, a silent agreement to keep moving forward together, step by uncertain step. The foal, braver now, darted around them, sometimes stumbling, always looking back to see if Wyatt or Banner would follow. Wyatt laughed, a true laugh, full and free, and chased after her through the shallows, boots splashing, Banner tossing his head in mock annoyance. Back at the barn, Wyatt spent evenings by the stove, journaling about the days and sometimes reading passages aloud to Banner, who seemed content just to listen. He filled the pages with questions, with apologies, with moments of raw honesty. "I see now," he wrote, "that family is not only what we're born with, but what we build and fight for. Justice isn't just punishment. It's what happens when the wounded are made whole, when wrongs are set right, and when those who've lost their way find belonging again." The townsfolk visited often, bringing their own stories and sharing their hopes for the future. Wyatt found himself drawn into their circle, even when he wanted to retreat. Dr. Salazar dropped by to check the horses, always leaving a warm smile behind. Teenagers who'd helped at the firehouse now rode their bikes up the lane, lingering to pet the foal or feed Banner slices of apple. But it wasn't all easy. Wyatt still woke sometimes in the dark, haunted by old storms, by memories of his wife and the losses that had carved him hollow. Banner, too, would startle at strange noises, the past never far behind. But in those moments, Wyatt remembered what the river had taught him. Even the fiercest current can smooth the sharpest stone, given enough time. He kept Banner's old halter on a hook by the barn door, the brass tag shining in the afternoon light. Some evenings, he'd hold it in his hands and remember the warning it had carried. "If you're reading this, he's not safe yet." And he would whisper, softly so only the horses heard, "You're safe now. We all are. For as long as I draw breath." As the days grew longer and the snow melted away, Wyatt began to see how much he'd changed. Not just surviving, but living again, letting himself hope, letting himself belong. He understood, finally, that real strength wasn't the old rodeo bravado he'd once worn like armor. It was quieter, showing up day after day, risking love again even when the world had taught you not to. It was trusting, even after betrayal, and allowing the broken parts of yourself to be seen and healed. And it was this, most of all, that Wyatt realized as he watched Banner and the foal run along the river's edge. Justice was unfinished unless it restored the wounded. Family could be made from the bonds we chose, not just those we were born with. Banner's journey was his own, but it had become Wyatt's as well, and together they'd found a kind of peace, He closed his journal, the sun warm on his back, and looked out at Elk River. The land, the water, the lives forever changed. And in that moment, Wyatt Granger understood the lesson he'd been searching for all along. You don't have to be unbroken to be worthy of love, or to make a difference. You only have to keep moving forward, even when you're scared, even when the road is long. That's what healing really means. Spring crept gently over Elk River, dissolving the last snowdrifts, coaxing wildflowers out of the thawed earth, and washing the valley with new light. Wyatt Granger woke to birdsong and sunlight in the kitchen, the kind that reached deep, warming even the oldest griefs. The days felt lighter, the kind of days that invited possibility. He moved through morning chores with a quiet energy, feeling the world open up in small, hopeful ways. The town had changed too. The story of Banner, the foal, and the rescue at the old ranger station had rippled through Elk River and beyond, stirring something in people that was deeper than outrage. It was a longing for justice, for compassion, for the chance to do better. Where there had once been suspicion or silence, there was now conversation and action. On a bright Saturday, the whole town gathered at the Riverside Fairgrounds for a celebration unlike any Elk River had seen before. There were hayrides, music, laughter, tables loaded with food, and banners strung between cottonwoods. But at the center of it all were the rescued horses. Children clustered around paddocks, faces lit with awe as Banner, his coat now glossy and thick, stood quietly for 100 gentle hands. The foal, still smaller than the others, but bold as a spark, ran circles around her elders, delighting everyone. Wyatt stood beside Banner, feeling something like pride swell inside him. For years, he'd carried his scars in silence. Today, the town honored him with simple gestures, a handshake, a hug, a thank you that lingered just a beat longer than necessary. Dr. Salazar handed him a blue ribbon, her eyes shining. "For courage," she whispered, pinning it to Banner's halter. "And for not giving up, even when it seemed pointless." The mayor called everyone together for a few words. Wyatt, uncomfortable in a crowd but steady, stood with Banner at his side as the mayor spoke about the new law, about transparency and community, and about the horses who had brought Elk River together. "We're here," she finished, "because one man, one horse, and one frightened foal reminded us what decency really means. We are their guardians now, and each other's too." Afterward, children approached Wyatt shyly. One little girl, with tangled hair and bright eyes, reached up and touched Banner's brass tag, the one that had once been a warning, now polished to a golden gleam. Wyatt knelt and slipped the tag from the halter, pressing it gently into her palm. "It's for luck," he said, voice thick, "and for courage. You keep it safe and it'll keep you safe too." The girl beamed, holding the tag as if it were treasure. The afternoon blurred in a whirl of laughter and sunshine. Wyatt found himself at the river's edge, Banner drinking beside him, the foal splashing in the shallows. Neighbors lingered close, people who had, in one way or another, found their own kind of healing through the ordeal. The town felt different now. Not perfect, not free from loss or trouble, but awake, aware that justice and belonging are built by everyday hands. As the sun dipped low, casting everything in warm gold, Wyatt watched Banner wander down the riverbank, foal trotting after him, a line of other rescued horses following in their wake. The sight struck Wyatt hard. All these creatures who had survived storms, some visible, some invisible, and who now moved forward, together, as a herd. Banner stopped, lifting his head toward the wind, For a moment, the whole valley stilled. Wyatt stood a few paces behind, then on impulse followed. He walked beside Banner, boots in the soft earth, his shadow long and easy next to the geldings. Every step forward was a step away from the old ache, a step toward a future not yet written. At the edge of the water, Wyatt paused, looking back at the gathering. He felt his late wife's presence in the hush, her spirit stitched into the place she'd loved, and the good she'd begun. He touched the old leather bracelet on his wrist, then Banner's notched ear. "Thank you," he whispered. Not just to Banner, but to the life that had given him a second chance. That evening, under lanterns strung between trees, the celebration turned quiet and gentle. There was no big speech, no fanfare. Just neighbors sharing stories, hands joined over new plans for the wild horses' care. Wyatt watched as the children ran barefoot in the grass, the foal chasing them in clumsy delight. Banner content to be petted and fed for hours. Later, Wyatt found himself beside Dr. Salazar, both watching the horses graze in the soft dusk. She spoke quietly. "This is what healing looks like, Wyatt. Not erasing the past, but building something better on top of it." He nodded, feeling the truth settle deep in his chest. "Redemption isn't a finish line," he said. "It's just the next mile, one step after another, together." In the final moments of daylight, Wyatt led Banner and the foal home along the riverbank, a small procession of townsfolk trailing behind. The world felt wide and possible. As the last light faded, Wyatt looked back. He saw Banner silhouetted against the orange sky, head high, scars and all. A living legacy of what it means to survive and trust again. He understood then that American resilience isn't built on never falling, but on rising together, man, horse, and community, again and again. Even broken beginnings could lead to belonging, courage, and hope. At the edge of the water, with Banner beside him and the town behind him, Wyatt let himself believe, truly believe, that second chances were real, and that sometimes the bravest thing was to walk into the future side by side, changed but unafraid.